Long before the rise of Islam, southern Arabia was a land of staggering wealth and fierce empires. Just picture sweeping landscapes of desert mountains, ancient caravan routes, and bustling cities enriched by the global trade of frankincense and myrrh. It's like a giant puzzle of powerful kingdoms controlling the world's most lucrative trade networks. And among their rulers, one king would become remembered for both his absolute power and for orchestrating one of history's most tragic, history-altering events. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the epic story of the last independent king of the Himyarite Kingdom, Dhu Nuwas. Okay, let's dive into this. Listen to this fiery quote from a Christian primary source, detailing the martyrs of Najran. He made Najran an uninhabitable wasteland, attacked the execrable and impious Jew by land and sea. Right away, this sets the stage for an era defined by a brutal geopolitical and religious conflict. This wasn't just some local skirmish. It was a massive collision of faith, power, and economics that literally reshaped the ancient Middle East. Chapter 1: Arabia's Lost Kingdom, Wealth and Worship. Looking at Himyar's strategic position around 517 CE, you immediately see why it was so incredibly important. Operating out of its capital, Zafar, Himyar controlled the critical choke points of the Red Sea and the enormously lucrative overland incense road. Geographically speaking, this was an absolute gold mine. But it also placed the Himyarites right in the crosshairs of the two great superpowers of late antiquity, the Christian Byzantine Empire to the northwest and the Zoroastrian Persian Empire to the northeast. Everyone wanted a piece of this territory. And this brilliantly illustrates the kind of wealth we're talking about. These ancient silver coins reflect the immense, almost unimaginable riches generated by the South Arabian trade. The Romans literally called this region Arabia Felix, which translates to Arabia the Prosperous. But that massive wealth from frankincense and spices, it painted a huge target on Himyar's back, especially for foreign powers like the neighboring Christian Ethiopian empire of Aksum, situated just right across the Red Sea. So what do you do when empires are constantly breathing down your neck? Well, you make a pivot. In response to this constant external pressure, the Himyarite elite made a fascinating ideological shift. By the late 4th century CE, they actually transitioned away from their traditional polytheistic roots and heavily adopted Judaism. Now, this wasn't just a spiritual awakening. It was a highly calculated political maneuver. By embracing Judaism, the Himyarite kings essentially built a unified, independent ideological wall that allowed them to resist the encroaching cultural and political influence of the Christian Aksumites and Byzantians. Chapter 2: The Rise of Dhu Nuwas, Power, Faith, and Rebellion. Enter our main character. The man who orchestrated this aggressive shift was Yusuf Asar Yathur, best known to history by his nickname, Dhu Nuwas, which translates to Lord of Sidelocks. And yes, he proudly wore his hair in curly sidelocks as a highly visible symbol of his strict adherence to rabbinic Judaism. He was totally committed to the absolute rule of Jewish scriptural law. Around 517 CE, Dhu Nuwas actually seized the Himyarite throne through a violent coup, assassinating a pro-Aksumite ruler. And once he was in power, he fiercely enforced Judaism as the mandatory state religion to purge any remaining foreign influence. Now, what's really interesting about this is how history views Dhu Nuwas through two starkly different lenses. Many modern scholars look at him as a pragmatic, geopolitical strategist who was aggressively defending Himyarite sovereignty against an internal threat loyal to foreign powers. On the flip side, early Christian martyrologies and Byzantine records paint him exclusively as a fanatical religious persecutor, determined to completely eradicate Christianity from Arabia. The timeline of his rule was incredibly rapid and, frankly, violently explosive. He takes power in 517 CE. Just a few years later, in 523 CE, we see the infamous Siege of Najran, and by 525 CE, the massive Aksumite retaliation arrives. Let's look a little closer at that middle date, because it's absolutely the defining moment of his reign. Chapter 3: The Najran Massacre, a Fiery Crucible. So, setting the scene in 523 CE, Najran was this prosperous trading hub with a really large Christian population, and they maintained deep ties to the Aksumite Empire. Viewing them as an internal fifth column loyal to Ethiopia, Dhu Nuwas marched his army directly to the city. He besieged Najran, destroyed its cathedral, and issued a terrifying, non-negotiable ultimatum to the inhabitants: convert to Judaism or die. When the city's leaders refused to renounce their faith, the king ordered mass executions. 20,000. That is the staggering upper estimate from Syriac chronicles of the Christians who are martyred. And the method was horrifying. The victims were cast alive into massive, fiery trenches dug straight into the earth. So the crucial point is the sheer, unwavering resolve of these martyrs, which is captured in deeply moving Syriac texts like the Book of the Himyarites. In one particularly gruesome account recorded by Simeon of Beth Arsham, a noble woman named Room is forced to watch her family slaughtered and is made to taste their blood. When the king asks her how it tastes, she defiantly replies, like a pure, spotless offering. These stories of absolute defiance spread like wildfire, igniting outrage far beyond Arabia's borders. Chapter 4. The Fall of Himyar. Empires Collide. You can't do something like that without the whole world noticing. News of the massacres at Najran quickly reached the courts of Byzantium and Ethiopia. The entire international Christian community mobilized. Acting on this outrage, King Caleb of the Aksumite Empire, with heavy logistical support and backing from the Byzantine Emperor Justin I, launched a massive naval invasion. Make no mistake, this was essentially an ancient crusade aimed at destroying Dhu Nuwas, protecting the Christian populations, and, conveniently, seizing total control of those incredibly lucrative incense trade routes. The retaliation was absolute. In 525 CE, Aksumite forces successfully crossed the Red Sea. Dhu Nuwas's armies were completely crushed, and the capital of Zafar was captured. Facing total defeat, the story goes that Dhu Nuwas rode his horse directly into the crashing waves of the Red Sea, drowning himself rather than being captured. With his dramatic, cinematic death, the last independent Jewish kingdom of Himyar collapsed completely, falling under Aksumite control. Chapter 5. Echoes in History, Legend and Legacy. Let's move to and see how this builds our historical understanding. We aren't just relying on one biased source here. Yes, we have external accounts like the Syriac Book of the Himyarites, but we also have internal corroboration. We found boastful military rock inscriptions left by Dhu Nuwas's own commanders at Himyar, actually celebrating the conquest of Christian sites. Plus, modern archaeological excavations at Ukhdud near Najran have revealed physical ash-filled trenches and fortifications from this exact period. It really grounds these epic ancient tales in physical, undeniable reality. The trauma of this event scarred the Arabian consciousness for centuries. In fact, in Islamic tradition, Surah 85 of the Quran tells the story of the people of the ditch, or Ashab al-Ukhdud, believers who were thrown into fiery trenches simply for their faith. Modern scholars and Islamic traditions widely interpret this passage as preserving the memory of the Najran martyrs. It's a profound example of how this specific tragedy transcended its own time to become a universal, timeless symbol of faith under persecution. Ultimately, Dhu Nuwas remains one of the most debated, controversial rulers of antiquity. Whether you see him as a desperate king trying to save his nation's independence, or as a brutal zealot, his reign is the perfect lens through which to view ancient Arabia. It perfectly illustrates how religion, politics, and the relentless pursuit of power and wealth shaped the ancient world, long before the dawn of Islamic civilization. I want to leave you with this provocative thought. If ancient trade routes and empire building could so completely dictate the fates of kings and the fate of thousands, how much of our modern geopolitical map is still haunted by the ghosts of these ancient, fiery conflicts? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I really encourage you to keep exploring the lost chapters of our shared history.